Welcome to Pirate Living Podcast. Today we're back with Katherine Spallino, author of the book The Bad Cadet, Growing Up in the Church of Scientology Sea Organization. We first talked with Katherine a few episodes back in number 114. If you haven't checked that one out, we highly recommend you go back and give it a listen. Katherine grew up in Scientology Sea Org as a cadet, and her book follows her experience as she was growing up. Katherine eventually got out of the Sea Org and is now telling her story. So, Katherine, thanks for coming back to talk with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk with you guys and hear your thoughts about my book.
Yeah, last time we talked with you, we learned about what it was like growing up at the Sea Org, and we're now back to dig even deeper into your book and your experiences now that we have both read The Bad Cadet. And it was such a good read. Like I think I devoured it in about 3 days. So that's always a good sign when you just kind of can't put it down. And I really, really just kept wanting to learn more. But yeah, what was it like even just writing the book to start with?
So at the beginning, I began writing it when I was about 21, 22, when I was coming out of Scientology, which is a whole nother story that's not in this book. But I was just like, I always was aware that my life was a little strange. And I'm like, I'm going to write this down. I don't know if I could ever publish this, but I'm going to put it all down. Mm-hmm. And it was just like good for me, like almost therapeutic in a way. I would just like put it all out on paper. And it kind of made me process everything that happened. So I don't have a lot of I would say like anger or resentment for everything that happened in my life. Like I'm like, oh, yep, that happened. But like, this is my life moving forward. So that part has been great. And then when it came to actually crafting the story and writing it, so it's something that people could read, that was more of an adventure because I had to be more intentional. I had to decide if I was going to be writing it looking back or was I going to write it from the time as a child. And I thought it's interesting. There's not a lot of memoirs out there. I don't think there were any currently of Scientology, people who've left Scientology, looking at it from when they were in Scientology and how much they believed in Scientology. And I was trying to show how indoctrinated I was, what it was like for a young child to be in that environment. And I thought the best voice was me as a child through my eyes as I remember it.
Yeah, it's really, you did a really good job with that too, because it does take you, instead of looking back on it and being like, oh man, this is all the stuff that happened to me and it being possibly better from that, it's coming along from the perspective of like your excitement as you were getting to do these new things. Like we were just talking about too, about how when you got to make hot dogs in the kitchen and you were so excited about that, and then you burned your arm. And but yeah, like, and then we find out what, you were 8 years old when that, or was it six?
I was 8 years old, although it turned out I was probably 9. I also didn't, the chapter where I didn't know my actual age because I was so disconnected from my parents. So there's nobody there to like really give me the feedback about my life. So I had my age wrong. I don't even know how that can happen, but it happened. So yeah, I was 9 and I fell on a huge grill. It's a grill that you would see in an industrial sized kitchen because I was cooking hot dogs for like 200 kids. And I'm like lean on a stool because I'm too short, leaning to get to the back. And I just slide off and land on my arm. And I still kind of have the scar. It's probably hard to see, but it's like, it was like from here to here. Luckily it's like really faded. And it kind of just looks like, that part where it's tan to white. So it kind of blends, but yeah.
So kind of just rewinding a little bit, because when the book starts, you're already separate from your parents and you're living in, I can't remember what it's called, but basically like in dorms, which I thought was really, first of all, interesting that you had like a dorm mother, but it wasn't your mother, even though your mother was a dorm mother.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about that, but when did you start living in that housing? Because it says you were like, was it 6 when you started living that way, and what was it like before?
So my earliest memories are always in a dorm. I literally don't remember ever living with my parents, but like when I actually can like pin down an age, it's about when I was 6 years old. I wasn't journaling then, obviously. It's just more of those memories of that time. And knowing 2 years later, I went to the ranch. So there was a couple years in this building that was called the Anthony Building. We called it the AB. And my parents lived on a different floor than me. So but randomly, my mom was also a dorm mom, and I had a different adult as my dorm mom. And a dorm mom was not somebody that I would go to get hugs from. It was just somebody that you went to as like a point of contact for something. Like, I don't know, hey, they're bothering me. Can you tell them to stop bothering? Like a teacher. It was like having a teacher in your dorm. But it wasn't like I didn't have any like affection. I didn't have any hate either. It was just like, this is the person in charge.
Did you have anybody that you would go to at all for like, I need a hug? Or was it just because you were growing up with other kids? Was it just your friends?
I think it was mainly my friends and my brother, who's mentioned a lot in my book, Judson. He was definitely somebody I could go to and like relate to, and felt I could trust him completely. That he wouldn't what's called like tattletale, basically, or report on me. But I don't think I really had an adult figure besides I did love my mom. I had this like string of love and invisible line connection to her. So I did feel loved by her, even though she wasn't around me taking care of me.
Yeah. And
Which
I think
is good that I had that like in my mind.
Yeah. And you can see that how like the excitement that you express anytime you got to see her or even like wave to her throughout the years. Like it doesn't seem like you got to spend a lot of time with her, but the time that you did spend, it seems like you were really excited to see her and looked forward to those times.
Yeah. Yeah. As an adult, I've asked her, did she nurse me at all? And she did. So I do think maybe that was what built a like innate connection that I didn't really understand, because I really did not get much time with her. We had like Christmas Day, which was one day a year, and then they used to do Family Day, and then they stopped doing that. So that was when I was like 7 years old, and that was one day a year as well, like in August. And then other than that, it was a couple hours on Sunday morning. They used to let us spend the night on Saturday night and then Sunday morning, and then they stopped doing that. It's like they slowly took away that family time and normalized it for these Sea Org members, so that eventually they just weren't seeing me at all, or their children at all. Because at first there was more of it, and even then it wasn't enough. But then like by the time me and my friends are all 10, 11, 12, most of us are rarely seeing our parents. It was unusual for a cadet to see their parent every weekend or every other weekend.
And so on that, but also back a little bit to something you had said, like you're all kids growing up under a dorm mom or dorm parent, and you, like you said, you had a few people you could go to without them tattling on you. And so that's another thing too. Like it was normalized within the group too. Like if somebody says something that isn't code, you go to the adult, you go to somebody else and you report on them. So yeah, I mean, I'm impressed too that you have trust as an adult after all that time of like not being sure who you could trust as well. But yeah, what was that like?
It was so strange to think it was normal to report on my friends. But after a while, I began to just pick and choose. Like I didn't really write reports a lot. Like I didn't like being written on, so I didn't write them on my friends generally. So it was rare for me to write a knowledge report. And I had friends who didn't. You know which friends to trust and which ones might tattletale on you. And I don't know, you just kind of navigated it in that way. It is strange, like if you look at it like that point of view, it's a good point. Like I should have major trust issues on people. I think because I didn't quite buy into that system. I just assumed that not everybody bought into the system. And also I recognized that they were just like indoctrinated to do that. So I don't really have trust issues. I generally trust people.
Okay, and so when you were about 8, that's when you ended up going to the ranch. And so that's when you were considered a Sea Org cadet and basically treated more like an adult.
Yeah, an adult in small bodies is what they would call us.
Oh, yeah. Looking back on it now, because like it seems like you'd spent most of your time doing like all this like manual labor and like child labor.
Mm-hmm.
Like what are your thoughts now when you look back on it and how you actually spent your time, like with like labor versus education versus like Scientology courses? Like how was
Mm-hmm.
that really split? Because in the book it feels like mostly you're doing labor.
It was split like if you had a 12-hour day,
Yeah.
one portion of that would have been labor. So like 4 hours with the break in
Mm.
between. And then you'd have like around 4 hours for Scientology studies and then around 4 hours for education.
Mm.
And in there is like PE and meals. But we had a whole regimented day from 8 a.m. all the way till 10 p.m. where it was filled with either work or studies. And then on the weekend, it was a whole long day of like cleaning the whole ranch. It's called the white glove Saturdays. You get the white glove. You have to be past white glove inspection. You have to have a white glove on the person, and they would like run it over the windowsill and look at their glove. And you would think with all of this training that I would be really good at cleaning, but my house is a mess.
I think it's you get to be the opposite though, because you were so
Yeah.
clean for so many years that it's like, no.
You're rebelling.
You have
That's what it
permission.
is. Yeah. I'm like, I could keep up with like the dishes, but like at the, yeah. When you have 3 kids too, you kind of just have to give yourself grace.
It's true.
Yeah.
Especially when there's twins involved.
Yeah. You should see I'm in their room right now and it's like just stuff everywhere. Because they're all downstairs where I normally record. And I'm like, what's the point of picking it up? They're gonna trash it that night. So just leave it.
So one of the other interesting things is once you're at the ranch, technically you should be earning a wage for your labor, but you don't have a social insurance number. How was it just like something that was like missed when you were born, the fact that you weren't like registered, or is this something because you were born in Scientology? Like what happened there?
Right. I think my mom, being the fourth child, just did not register my paperwork for being born. And she had a midwife. I was born in the Hollywood Scientology building that's literally in the middle of Hollywood with the stars underneath. But she never filed the paperwork. So I never had a social security number. And it was just so unlucky. And nobody did anything about it to compensate for it. So my friends are all getting $15, a little bit less than $15 a week, and I'm getting nothing. And my parents aren't around. So I'm just like broke and poor. And I blame myself. Like I feel ashamed for myself instead of being like to an adult, hey, this isn't cool. Like I should be getting paid too.
Yeah. I was just gonna say if it were like, we're gonna make sense of this, either they pay you under the table or they pay somebody else in your family or they compensate you years later. Like there's so many things that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Well, and I think sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say they did try to do like a compensation because I think there were a few cadets that had minor issues. Mine was like the worst. But because mine, again, I just got like it was so unfair. Like the ones who had smaller back pay got their pay and I didn't because like, well, we don't have enough money to pay yours yet. And then I never got it. And it was probably like like $1,000 or something. I don't know. It was a lot.
Which is interesting and jumping ahead because when you left the Sea Org, they said that you owed them money for the courses. Just like,
which is not cool, right? So all of my friends who were on what's called the TTC, they went into the Sea Org earlier than me and trained like to be class 5 auditors, which is like a lot of training in Scientology. They owed like $70,000 and they were like 20 years old. And it was so not cool. I think because there was a lot of cadets that left and then they had these bills, these freeloaders, some of them were paying them off. But I think a couple of them, like some had like important parents and they're like, I have this huge freeloader debt. And they're like, oh, so eventually they waived some of them for like the TTCers. I think if you were underage, eventually they waived it. But at that time, when I had left, it wasn't until I was like 20 when they did that. And I was like, yes, so glad I never paid anything on it. Because I was, again, not good at doing that stuff. But like if you had paid it off, you don't get that money back. because it
Yeah.
was like, too bad, so sad. Like there's all these like arbitrary things that happen.
So just rewinding back then to like not getting paid, then there's a lot of your like basic needs then that weren't getting met. Like you weren't like you talked about how like your friends found out that you only had one pair of underwear, or like just some of the basic like
So embarrassing.
yeah like
I was like
basic
mortified. Yeah.
like
Well, and that's not your fault, but you
yeah
felt
Yeah.
yeah.
and like basically like toiletries and things like that.
Mhm.
So in that time where you weren't getting any money, I mean, I remember a part where you were borrowing a friend's shoes because you didn't
Mhm.
have proper shoes. Like it's just like how is no one stepping in to like help you?
Right? I would be, if I saw a child like walking around without shoes, like you'd be
Mhm.
like, "Hey, well, you don't have any shoes? Let me see what I can find in my closet." Right?
Yeah.
Like like it's just like, and you would normally do all these things. I don't know, like there was no nurturing instinct in these adults. I think they were just like trying to corral a bunch of children and like push them through this training to get us all in the Sea Org. But
Mhm.
nobody ever asked me like, why are you walking around barefoot? And I
Mhm.
never thought to ask anybody. I just was asking my parents to please send me shoes, send me shoes. Like I don't have any
Mhm.
shoes, and pretending like I don't care, because what else can a child do but act like they don't
Mhm.
care when they're poor, you
Mhm.
know?
And who do you have to turn to too? Because like the guy in charge of the ranch is acting like he's treating you
Mm-hmm.
like your soldiers. He's in
Mm-hmm.
drill sergeant mode. And then even the times when like you mentioned you had a few people you felt like might listen to you if you talk to them as adults, but then maybe they give you glances because you got written up by one of your friends, like the note passing incident. And
Mm-hmm.
so who do you turn to? Like again, back to trust. Who can you trust to actually follow through and listen? So yeah, that's a tricky one too.
Yeah, it is. And I think overall, even though my normal outlook is somebody who's like positive, even as a child, I was like a pretty happy kid. There were moments where I would feel all alone and like who do I talk to, and like very angsty journal diaries, especially when I'm like 13, 14, middle school or 12. It's like, and that's when, at one point I even run away because I feel
Mm-hmm.
so alone. And I'm like, I need to go to my parents. And I don't know what my plan was going to be. What are they going to do? But all I knew was like I had to get out of there. And
Mm-hmm.
luckily, I did not get picked up by some random, I mean, I was picked up by a random, but they were a
Yeah.
kind person and not
Yeah.
Yeah.
somebody
Yeah.
that could have harmed me.
Yeah.
And especially I was a developed 12-year-old. It's frightening to look back on now.
Mm-hmm.
Like talking too about not like wanting to be noticed, wanting to get away, but also be noticed that, hey, I was gone. And how many times did you leave? And like it's only because you're brought back by the police or the strange man that anybody even realized that you were gone. And like as somebody that always felt that always was thinking my parents are paying attention to everybody else but me, I would have times where I'd be like, if I hold back long enough, will anybody notice that I'm gone? And so reading those like reading as you're going through that, I'm like very relatable from like wanting to be noticed. Like I'm not happy here, maybe somebody will notice that I'm not happy if they see that I've been gone, and then nobody notices that you were gone. And yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting to hear that even like when your life is completely different from mine, there's like these strings of
Mm-hmm.
familiarity. And I think it's been interesting hearing from like different aspects of people's lives where they relate to me, because there's that universal coming of age emotions that I keep going through, that a
Mm-hmm.
lot of young women go through, young girls. But I'm in a cult, and like, what is that like? It's a very it's interesting how it still somehow relates with other people in their own, whether I grew up in a normal house or a home with an alcoholic father, or
Mm-hmm.
in a very religious household, but having to do with like God or anything
Mhm.
like that.
So it was interesting though you tell a story about finally getting your eyes checked, tested,
Mhm.
and finding out that you're basically like legally blind and you needed like obviously glasses to see.
Mhm.
So it did get me thinking because I know a lot of your like financially you weren't getting paid, so a lot of those like basic needs weren't met. But I am wondering, it did make me curious about what like the medical needs and how were those met as you were growing up? Like, did you have regular checkups and doctors and all that stuff?
So they would get us vaccinated. And once a year, they would take us down to East LA and we would go to this like really dingy medical clinic and they would do physicals. I think it might have been once every few years, though. It felt like it wasn't very common, but
Mm.
it could have been once a year too. A year is a long time in a child's life. So they did do that, but then it would be like randomly, they'd be like, okay, like we never got dental checkups.
Mm.
So like it wouldn't be until like all of a sudden you had a cavity, then you're just going to the dentist. Like we didn't get like our teeth cleaned regularly. I ended up having a root canal at 10 years old because my
Okay.
teeth were like so neglected. I'm sure I wasn't flossing, you know.
Yeah.
I remember flossing because it's like there's not really anybody watching when there's like
Mhm.
25 kids and like the adult just passes through. It's really us just taking care of ourselves. I know my 10-year-old is horrible at flossing and
Mhm.
brushing his teeth, and he gets so annoyed at me, but I'm like, buddy, I just don't want you to get a cavity. It's like it's
Mhm.
there's no reason for me to tell you to do this. It's not because I want to annoy you. And
Mhm.
like I just don't want you to have what I had, which is a
Mhm.
bad root canal. And by the time I'm like in the Sea Org, like I have contacts, but they're like teared up and I can't
Mhm.
even get contacts. I keep writing CSW, it's called, it's a request. And they keep disapproving it because our org doesn't have enough money because we didn't have enough public in that week. And
Mhm.
it's like these are basic needs that they're not meeting when it's like obviously it should be met because we
Mhm.
don't have any health insurance either. And
Mhm.
a lot of people in the Sea Org are on like Medicare or Medicaid. Later on I have a second book that's coming out called The Bad Scientologist. My brother gets sick, really sick, unfortunately, and it gets paid for by the government because he has no money. But like, why would the government be paying for it when the church has millions, billions probably of dollars, right?
Mhm.
Like there's this weird, they won't do anything for their Sea Org members until they're actually sick, and by then it might be too late. And then those people are on government care because
Mhm.
their pay is only, it's like a stipend, it's not even pay. And the
Mhm.
Sea Org is only $50 a week, which is like with taxes taken out, like $37 or something.
Mhm. Well, I guess
Um,
that was like the disconnect for me while I was reading it because I'm like, why like are your parents don't have any money and here they are dedicated to like this church that I know has money and like it's
yeah,
talking about these like all these grand buildings and all the stuff that like the different buildings and stuff in Hollywood that you're talking about and
yeah,
even the ranch, but I'm like why does none of it go to its like help its members? That was like
right.
the part that I really couldn't understand and couldn't figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not good. Like they take all this money and they, excuse me, they just keep it in their coffers and they
Hmm.
buy other big. I actually don't even think they pay for these. Yeah, have you guys seen all these orgs? They're called their churches, but they're orgs
Mhm.
all over the world. They're like in every major city, in
Mhm.
Madrid and London, Los Angeles, Florida,
Mhm.
or in like Clearwater, obviously. They have these new orgs going up in like Austin. And they're called ideal orgs. And they
Mhm.
cost a few million at least, but the public raise money to buy that building.
Mhm.
So even then, the church isn't buying these buildings, but then the church owns it. So there's got to be like billions of just money sitting in
Yeah.
the coffers, and it
Mhm.
only goes to one man who controls it all, David
Mm.
Miscavige. He has
Hmm.
nobody who he reports to. There's no board of directors. They have that they call technology center, which would be considered the board, but he's the boss of all of them and he treats them inhumanely.
Mhm.
So I don't know what he's doing with all that money or why. And like I don't know why they don't take care of their people, the
Hmm.
senior members. And right now there's like a fear, like my parents are elderly. Are they actually being properly cared for?
Mhm.
I
Hmm.
literally don't know. And I'm hoping because my sister is still in the Sea Org that she's advocating for them and making sure they go to appointments. Because if you advocate for yourself, it might be hard, but you probably could still make sure you get your correct medical care. But a lot of them don't. Like, they're willing to put themselves last and put the org first. But the org should be like, all of you need to make sure you get your physicals. All of you, now you're at this age, you got to make sure you get your, colonoscopies or whatever. Like all of these things that are important to prevent cancer. And there's a huge rate of cancer in the Sea Org of like these elderly people because they're probably not monitoring everything.
Yeah. So then back to within the book, you were at the ranch. Well, there are a few things that happened. Like, first, you got in trouble with the passing a note, a very normal thing to do as a child or a young teen. So you get in trouble. You're put in isolation. Let's talk about that, because then soon after you get out of isolation, you are also sent over to apartments, and then you come back to the ranch again. But you've had a lot of moving around in these parts. But yeah, I want to start with you're trying out the boyfriend girlfriend role as kids do, and you pass a note to this boy, and then end up very short time later finding out you're in trouble for giving him the note. And will you talk a little bit on that? And also, I was wondering if you ever found out too, if you anyone that was involved within the note passing, if you ever found out, like, why were you the only one that got in trouble?
So regarding the note passing, the note scandal, I don't know. I still don't know why. I think it was literally arbitrary. They didn't like me, the adults, and they put me on they felt like, because of all these little things I do. So for example, I talked to my friend Clarissa, who is Lacey's older sister in the book. She and I became close friends post Sea Org. We were roommates and everything, but she worked at the ranch as an adult, and she was like 15 years old or like 16 years old. So she didn't like she was in the Sea Org and hated it. And then they're like, well, what if you're a supervisor, which is like a teacher, at the ranch? And she was like, yes, please. Like, at least there's some semblance of fun at the ranch, right? Like, they let us go to the beach. There's things like that. So she said her point of view of me was that I was always giving attitude and like being really snarky. And I thought it was funny because I'm like, what, really? And she's like, you literally called your book The Bad Cadet. Why are you surprised? Like, because I heard your snark. I just gave a little attitude if I didn't think it was correct what they were doing.
I'm glad that didn't get stomped out in you too, because like, it's not easy as a kid to be the one that's speaking up and speaking out. So I'm glad that didn't get snuffed out of you.
Yeah, me too. So I think regarding the note incident, because I had a pattern, and it's like probably one thing too many, and apparently they didn't have the other note that or my friend, sorry, she's a different name in the book, but if we could edit that part out. But she was like really cute, adorable. Everybody loved her. She was always considered in ethics, even though she did a lot of the unethics things with me. So it was very unfair. They're like, she has ethics protection. And
that's what, I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah. So she just gets away with it. Even though he's again, you'll have to edit the name. Sorry. But they all just get away with it.
So two questions on that. So what's the difference between being like in and out of ethics and out of valence?
So ethics is like when you're following the rules and you're doing, when you're in ethics, you're doing what is expected of you. You're following the rules, good behavior, no backflash, which is when you talk back. Out ethics being the opposite of that. And valence is like your personality. So like when you're out of valence, you're not in your correct personality. But when I was loud and singing, I was out of valence because they don't want me having that as my personality. They want me to be quiet, listening, sitting still, just being like, a little soldier. So I was always constantly told, stop being out of valence. And now I look back and they're just saying, stop being yourself.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to like get rid of that side of me. And I was always like, this is my valence. What do you mean?
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, because there's a lot of different like terminologies and stuff in the book and obviously in Scientology. And that was the one that I yeah, that I just
you're like,
wanted
what?
clarification.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
makes sense if you're like in ethics, out of ethics. I know when I've done something that's out of
Yeah.
ethics, but the valence one was like a little trickier.
Yeah.
So how then does someone else have ethics protection? And what does that
So
mean, that they can do things out of ethics and just get away with it?
yeah, they could be out ethics and get away with it. Like L. Ron Hubbard has a policy letter, like if your stats are up, you can like murder someone, was like his like equivalent. So like Danny Masterson with all of the raping that he was doing. I don't know if you're allowed to use that word. What should I say?
Yeah.
Sexual assault.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like he was in ethics because he's like a actor who's like really public. Who's a Scientologist. So in their mind, he has ethics protection. So that's probably a lot of why they were on his side. Now, it has come out recently in like the Scientology news that he's been declared a suppressive person. So that's very interesting. I think they finally were like, oh, now that it looks bad, he's made us look bad. We're done with you. Like, no more ethics protection. And that means his brothers and his sister, like Jordan Masterson, Alana Masterson, no longer can talk to him. So that's very, even his wife, I think she's a Scientologist.
Yeah.
It's just very like, it just shows you what the church is like. I mean, they should have done that before when women were saying we were being raped. But no, they wait till like now that the church looks bad, that's when they excommunicate him.
It's interesting. Yeah, because like even jumping forward a little bit, and the fact that like they were calling like protesters that were outside of the Scientology building suppressive people. So did you ever find out like what they were protesting about?
Yeah, it was Lisa McPherson. If you Google her, she like a woman who went like had a mental breakdown at the Florida church called Clearwater, and like they locked her in a room and we're trying to run a process that L. Ron Hubbard made up for people who go insane, but like she was severely dehydrated, like not eating, all of these things, and finally she's like had like an episode or something, and they brought her to the car and were just bringing her to a Scientology doctor, not even the ER. And then on the way to the ER, she died, or to the Scientology doctor. So it was a huge thing, like a huge, what they would call the flap, which is like something that's like not good on public relations for them. And so then people heard about it. It was in the news and stuff. And then people were protesting saying like, what happened to this poor girl? So that was the sign I saw, Lisa McPherson, something about her, but I didn't know. I don't have the news. I don't have access to the internet. But that was me glimpsing the outside world for a minute. Yeah.
Well, again, and then it was interesting on how much trouble you got.
Yeah, for looking at a sign. Yeah. So this is like the biggest sign if you're in a relationship or in a cult where they tell you not to look at things, like red flag. It's like when they're saying like never look at these things, it will kill you. Like, okay. Yeah. Well, those people don't know what they're talking about. All of those people, like that's a lot of people. Always get two sides to a story if you can. It's like what I'm like, as I've been talking about this book, going on all these podcasts, I've realized more and more as I'm becoming and talking about like, how did I get out? It's like, oh, I looked at things. I never just accepted things for face value. And like, I'm like, oh, that's kind of my message. It's like, just always investigate for yourself. If you're in a group or a relationship that you're not sure about, go ahead and do some research. There's no harm.
Yeah. You were asking questions like, even from a very young age, like, why am I doing this? Like, isn't this child abuse? Or like, why am I in trouble for doing this thing? And then you'd like, you wrote about as well the times where you would talk yourself back around to it, but because you were asking questions and asking the whys, like eventually it got to a point where you couldn't talk yourself out of it anymore.
Yeah.
Well, and it was interesting. I think it was when when you were in the ranch, and I don't remember the little girl that you met. I think she was new there, and says something about being, a Sea Org member, and she's like, I don't want to be a Sea Org member.
Mhm.
And you were talking about how like she was so casual about it, and that was like it got you it made you question about like, oh yeah, I mean, I don't have to be like a Sea Org member. Like there's other things that are out there. And it seemed like just in reading it seemed like the first time you kind of questioned whether that was actually your what you wanted to do. Because I feel like, I mean, obviously the path is laid out for you. But what was it like as a young, and Kristen and I have talked about this like offline, but like, what was it like for a young person to like be questioning if this is what you want to do for the rest of your life? We've talked about this. I'm like, I think I had that thought when I was 40, like, not like 10.
Yeah, you're 15 and you peaked. You're like, I'm a Sea Org member now.
Exactly. And that's when I realized, oh no, like for the rest of my life doing this, it was it's kind of like so limiting to think like, oh, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna be in the Sea Org. Of course, it's like you're doing a big purpose. You're going to be saving the world, or so they tell me all the time. So I like envisioning, okay, at least when I'm in the Sea Org, it's going to be important work. But then the work I'm doing in the Sea Org to me is not good work at all. My first job, I have to call disaffected Scientologists and try to convince them to come back. And I'm 15 years old and they're yelling at me. I'm getting cussed at. I'm just like, what is this? So just having that like hanging over me of like, this is what I have to do forever. It was like, I can't do this forever. And like knowing, I'm like, okay, well, I could not be here and just still be an amazing Scientologist, which was like my first step towards like getting out. It's like, first I was like, you could be a Scientologist and living in the regular world, and people might not understand that. Is like, you could at least still kind of have a life. But you are still controlled. Like your relationships are all around Scientology. It's like being in a very tight, like what would be the word, like a religious group that's super strict. Right. So you're like not going to be drinking a lot or any of things like that. You're always going on course a lot, but you still have a life, nights and weekends and stuff. Generally, you have to go on course. But so I was like, I could do that. That seems more reasonable. And then when I'm doing that, which is the second book, I encounter the real world, and now I have even more questions, right? Like I have access to like what the real world is actually like, and it's not as horrible as they portrayed it to be to me. Where because they're always telling me, if you leave the Sea Org, you're just gonna be like flipping burgers somewhere, or you're gonna be like end up doing drugs or be a prostitute. I'm like, gosh, like I don't want to be a prostitute. like that's not my choice of my life, And I'm like, I'll make sure I don't do that. I could do that. I could be in charge of myself in that way. So it's such a funny thing that they try to frighten us into that feeling. And it probably worked because like half of my cadet friends are still in the Sea Org.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions.
Like 40. Yeah. So like the really in ethics ones in my book are still in the Sea Org. Like surprise, surprise. Like Beatrice, she's like in a chapter where I'm like, how is she always so in ethics? She's still in the Sea Org. And like the one who lends me her shoes, she's such a sweetheart. She's still in the Sea Org. Because like the sweethearts, they stay a lot too because they're people pleasers, So it's interesting. When I look back, I'm like, oh, all the kids that were kind of had a rebellious streak, like left. And then a few were like a little later, like Lacey, she's one of my really good friends now. She left later, like 20, 21, like 5 years after me, but she did eventually get out, but she's a sweetheart too. But eventually she was like, she actually went on vacation and went to Austria and saw her family and like played pool and had a beer and was like, this is way funner than what I'm doing. Like you could just do this whenever, like on the, your nights and weekends. Like we don't even have nights and weekends in the Sea Org. Everything is so regimented and scheduled, except for you could ask for a day off if your stats are up. Like once in a while, you could get one day to yourself. So to get freedom is like amazing. So then, sorry.
I was going to say, so how do you get your stats up? Like, what does that even mean?
I mean, so like I was I was a CF clerk later. So when I was the call-in person calling disaffected Scientologists, it was just how many calls did I make? And then you always just, and if I was gonna have like I wanted to ask for libs, it's called, the next day, I would just make sure the week before that I did less calls so that I could be up the next week. Because it's like I'm not gonna always be up. And then so same with like letter writing. I would like if or like I was a CF clerk, so I just brought files to people. I would just make sure if I would ask for a day off the week before that it was a little less, and then I would just work more the week after. But some people would have jobs like registering public onto a leather course. Like that's less your control. You really have to make sure they want to register and like convince them. So that would be a harder one to maintain your stats on. But every week at Thursday before 2, everybody turns to their stats. The really random time. Thursday at 2 o'clock is like a frenzy in the org, and everyone's running around trying to get those last points of their stats as if their life depends on it every week. It was so crazy to me. I'm like, who cares?
Well, I remember, wasn't it when you left the ranch? Like, if you were going to be a Sea Org, like when you finally decided, like, well, you got to go before 2.
Yeah.
so that you would count the stats.
Yes. I'm just a statistic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that part's funny too, is like all of us leaving for this EPF, like we were told our whole lives, like, this is what you're going to do. And then it was so like blah, like go on EPF. Like there's no graduation. There was no like celebration or like excitement.
Yeah. And you didn't even really get like time to say goodbye to anyone.
Yeah. It was just like, go, time to go. They treated us literally like cattle. Like, here, you go there, you go there. And it was very like I didn't ask my parents, can I join the Sea Org? There was no discussion with my parents. It's like all of a sudden I see them when I'm on the EPF. I'm like, hey mom, I'm on the EPF now. She's like, oh, cool. Like that's how she hears. But now she's working a lot like in the same org as me when I'm working, and we're both equal. And I'm only 15 years old at that point.
Well, and then wasn't your sister became like what, an officer?
Higher.
So your sister was higher ranked.
Yeah. And I'm like, I'm not going to call you sir. Okay. She's like, fine. You don't have to.
Okay. And okay. So that confused me, because even though you said it in the book that everyone is called sir and Mr. And then I was reading and there was like Mr. something and then she, and I'm like, oh man, why didn't her editor like catch that? And then I was like, shit, no, I forgot. Like everybody is sir and Mr. Which I thought was really interesting. Like I'm not even opposed to everyone being called Mr. because I don't know why as women we need to like distinguish our marital status when we're being addressed. But it was interesting and a little confusing at first when I was reading it. I was like, wait, Mr., but then you said she or her, and I'm like, oh yes.
I know it is confusing, and I had to really make a choice, like how many times will I explain myself on certain things, and I just had to hope that people would kind of follow along. Same with like when I introduced words, I tried to just explain it with like sentences around it, because I was like, should I do footnotes or not? And I was like, I don't like footnotes personally, so I'm not going to do it. Like I'm also somebody who likes to be like, wait, this is interesting. I'm going to put my book down and go on Wikipedia for a minute and like read about it and then come back. But I could see why it would be like, stop, wait, Mr. like Mr. Hansen, and then they're like, oh, that's a woman. Or like sir, and it's a woman.
So you get in trouble a lot.
Yeah.
And I mean,
just a little bit.
I have to say, I was rooting for you like each and every time, and I think one of the main reasons was because like you weren't doing anything that like any normal teenager isn't or hasn't done. Do you know what I mean? One of the things that I've found, again, I mean, so much I found really interesting, but it seemed like the closer in your mind that you got to leaving, they had a way of just pulling you back in, whether it was like, oh, well, we're going to make you a Sea Org member, or like, oh, well, we're going to put you here instead, or why don't you just do this?
Or just ignoring it altogether.
Distraction tactics. Yeah.
And it almost seemed like there were certain times when you almost got like rewarded in a way for
Mm-hmm.
like not bad behavior, but you get in trouble and you'd be like, well, I want to leave. And they're like, well, why don't we give you this prize instead?
Mm-hmm.
Which I found really interesting. It was like the closer you got to making your decision to leave, um, it always somehow came back.
Mm-hmm.
The time that when you decided for sure that you wanted to leave, um, like what was the kind of straw that broke the camel's back?
So I was in the Sea Org. I think it was, as anybody, like if you're reading the book, you kind of really follow along with me, but
Yeah.
I'll just like sum it up with being fed up and like I
Mhm.
just wanted to have a life. Like I was
Mhm.
not having a life and I was aware of it. I watched movies, I read books. That's more fun. This was like menial tasks that they were making me do, and I wasn't good at it. I always was getting in trouble. Why should I stay? And I was like, maybe I'll do better on the outside world as a Scientologist. And there's a whole story there of things that happened to me that later where I come out of Scientology itself, where I began to research about Scientology once I'm starting to notice things about Scientology that aren't okay. And that's where I could come out of Scientology. So there's two different phases of my life. First, trying to just get out of the Sea Org and start a life, which I did. And by the time I was 17 years old, I was in LA, living on my own, had my own car, broke, but so happy. I was just like so glad to be in control of my life. And then I didn't realize how much control the church still had on me, even though I was not in the Sea Org. And that would be in the second book where my brother gets sick and they blame it on me, saying I'm the evil source, basically a suppressive person, and they excommunicate my family from me. That was very traumatic, and like I had to work through that and process it. And then with my brother being sick, I just started to go like look deeper around at what was around me to get out of, and like going on the internet, because they, I think we talked about this in the first podcast, like they like really ingrain it in you. Don't look at things that are negative about Scientology. It's all lies. It's all fake. You're just going to ruin your own progress up the bridge. Believe us. Don't believe anybody else. Only L. Ron Hubbard technology is true. Everything else is wrong.
Which is another thing. How to know when you're in a cult or a bad relationship is when they say only believe this information, not the other information.
Right. And it's actually like so true with so many things, like with politics too, right? Like so divided because nobody wants to hear the other side. And it's like, both sides could be true, but we don't have to be so extreme on either ends. Like there's conversations that could be had that aren't being had because of everybody being so extreme about what they believe. It's this way or the highway. Yeah.
I just wanted to actually ask you about the bridge, because you talk a little bit about it in the book, and I can't remember what it's called, but I mentioned a couple times that your dad was like level 3. Sorry, I think my mic just
Okay.
is
We
doing
can still
something.
hear you.
I'm gonna run and get my charger. I'm scared it's gonna die.
Okay.
I was at 50%, but now it's at 3%. So
okay.
pause for 1 second. 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
What was your question?
So yeah, talking about the bridge, and you had mentioned like in the book that your dad was, I can't remember what it's called, but like whatever. Yeah, OT3.
Yeah.
So like what is that?
Yeah. So great question. So the bridge is like you start at the beginning, and when people first enter Scientology, so people might be like, why would you ever become a Scientologist? In the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, the internet wasn't as huge with all of this bad stuff about Scientology. So when you first enter Scientology at the beginning of the bridge, it's a lot of self-help books and titles like Success Through Communication and How to Fix Your Marriage and How to Work Better, how to have a better work environment. Things that you actually could take away from it, like good tools that L. Ron Hubbard, like, cherry picked from different religions and doctors and scientists and compiled into actually pretty useful self-help books. And then as you progress, though, you get into processing. So when you're doing processing, you're sitting within an auditor, you have an e-meter, which is like a little lie detector, and they go through all your traumas. And once you get all those cleared, you're called to clear. Now you're a person who's clear. That means you have nothing no bad reactive mind, they would call it. You have two minds in Scientology, an analytical mind and reactive mind. You could guess the reactive mind is the one that's like, can't control your emotions or have reactions to things that you don't understand, like a car drives by and your ear hurts or something. So you get all of these like physical manifestations cleared up. Now you're on your OT levels, and each OT level, by now you've probably spent like 50K at least. And then each OT level like gets you to another level of being an operating thetan, because they believe you are not just a body, you have a spirit, and that spirit's called a thetan. So like me is a thetan, right? And you have many past lives. So now you're going to get another level of consciousness. I don't know what OT1 is or OT2 is, but at OT3, I found out on the internet, and nobody knows this until you get there. It's top secret, is when the aliens are introduced, like Xenu and stuff. So all of a sudden you're learning that there's like a galactic overlord, and like he grabbed all these souls and he threw them down at Earth, and there was a volcano. And I don't remember the whole story. I would have to look back on the internet, but I was just like, what? This can't be true. When I was reading this, I'm like, this is my dad has been stuck on that level for 30 years, probably because he's like, what's next after this?
Right. I got this far, paid all this money, and
a lot of people get stuck. Yeah. So
how many levels are there?
There's OT8.
Oh,
so you have to keep going. And then they get you to a point where auditing yourself. So you go into a closet when you're by like OT7, a closet like that's behind me, and you sit with an e-meter and you pull thetans off your body. And you're like thinking and you have to do it every day. So imagine like, wouldn't that kind of drive someone a little crazy? I'm just thinking like, if you're picturing little thetans attached to you, I don't know. I feel like, there's something about cleansing your aura. So maybe if they take it with that.
I like cord cutting is what it sounds like, but thetans instead.
Yeah. And obviously, as you guys know, I didn't do any of the Scientology processing at all, except for just those basic training. So I have all like the basic self-help book knowledge, but I never ever got like good auditing. Do you remember I got auditing in the book?
Kids your own age. Yeah.
They tell me to look up all these Scientology words. I'm like, this is so boring. I'm like, I wanted to go past lives. I wanted to learn if I was like a mermaid or a princess. So, and I think people, when I do go past lives, they're probably just making up memories. I'm really believing it because you're getting validated by the person across from you saying on the e-meter, your needle is floated, meaning like, wow, you really just found something like incredible. So imagine like how good that could make you feel. Like, I'm sure there are many wins that these people are getting from like clearing all their past traumas, but it's also, but you have to look at the other side of things too. Like, you could probably like whatever therapy you're getting, that's all great. But when you're having to pay thousands of dollars and everything's like tied into the church, like if your spouse says something wrong or negative, and you have to write them up, that's not okay. Like, that's a weird dynamic. And then to make it even worse, if your spouse goes on the internet and starts looking up stuff, now you got to like divorce them. Like, there's like no, or you would report them and they would go get what's called a sec check, which is like a confessional, but on an e-meter. And they would really be worked over so that they are no longer questioning Scientology. Like, those tactics are the like other side of it. Yeah.
Well, even when you got in trouble because you knew something that your brother was doing, even though you weren't doing it yourself.
Yeah.
And you got in just as much trouble for just knowing.
Accessory is like so if you're an accessory, you don't report it, you're as guilty, is how they do it in Scientology. So like, if you're trying to go up the bridge and your wife does something bad, or your husband, you're going to want to report them because you don't want it to affect you and your progress at the bridge. Plus, you're helping them. You need to fix them so that they're on the right path. Like, right? Like that whole like mental puzzle that they've had all these Scientologists in is amazing and sad. Yeah.
So tell us about the next book, because now I'm like,
I'm waiting for that one.
Yeah, that one is in the works. I'm writing it. I'm hoping to get it out in 2024. Fingers crossed. I'm just on the first draft only, but I feel like I now know how to write a book, that it'll be a much smoother process. But the bad Scientologist will follow me as I enter high school. The holy grail of where I want to go. Let me just tell you, high school is not like the movies, as you guys know.
Yeah.
So I get a bit of a culture shock. And it's me dealing with that, and then like just trying to like get back with my friends who are slowly all leaving the Sea Org. Some of my friends are. I'm like, I just want to be in LA with them, and not having any concept of what it means to be like, to like get an education and like go to college.
Oh,
What
yeah.
happens there? Do I? Guess you'll find out. No, I don't.
Well, and that's like real culture shock, because you weren't really doing school. So to like, now you're living with different family too, and learning what school is and what they expect you to do. And I will not make you spoil the book, but I just see you as one of those children that is not going to sit still for that many hours of the day. You have spunk. This is not. I'm going to imagine you did not do well with that.
Yeah, and then also my extended family that I ended up going to stay with is very Christian, so that was very, very strange for me. And like the type that goes to like big mega stadiums Christian.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was an experience as well. And that's where we began. And then it's like about it's like the few years after leaving the Sea Org I plan, and then I think I'm gonna fast forward to like when Leah Remini's show The Aftermath comes out and the ramifications of that, because my best friend's on it, which I'm like happy for her to do. But then because of that moment, my parents disconnect from me again, and they still do not talk to me because of that show, and how that leads me to where I am today, which is like Scientology shot themselves in the foot by like taking my family away from me. And I was never speaking out, I was keeping it all to myself. And I was like, well, I guess this story's coming out.
Yeah, I mean, what else do you have to lose, right? Like they've already taken your family, so you're right. They just like, cool. You got nothing else to take from me.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, I'll keep you guys updated when the book is coming out, and I have an Audible coming out in like 2 months. So if anybody's interested in that, just they can follow me on Instagram, and then I'll say when it comes out.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. What's your Instagram? Just remind us, even though we had it in our last show.
Cadet. Yeah, at the Bad Cadet, and then there's a TikTok, and now I'm doing YouTube. I don't know about that one. Well, I'm trying to do a YouTube channel. I'm like, I do. So I posted like 1 2-minute videos, and that's it.
Well, yeah. Plus on YouTube, you can just take all the shorts that you do from whatever, like, or not. They're shorts on YouTube. You can take what you put on Reels or the TikTok stuff and do it as shorts on YouTube, and then just maybe do a video every now and again.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And I have a couple of my cadet friends who are like, maybe we should do like cadet stories on there. So yeah. So if it comes naturally, I'll do it, but I'm not going to force it. My main attention and focus is not to be a YouTube star, to write The Bad Scientologist, because I think that story actually gets a lot meatier, a lot darker. I think I do The Bad Cadet is wonderful to really show what it's like as a child, and now it's going to show what it's like as coming of an age as an adult, to like really see what I grew up in and how like horrible it is basically, and how I discover it.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate you coming back on to talk about this book. This book is great. Everyone should go and read it. The Bad Cadet. Like I said, couldn't put it down, finished it in like 3 days. So highly recommend. And I'm really looking forward to the next one coming out.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much.
I want to ask you, like, the book's available on Amazon. Is it available other places?
Yeah. So for ebook, it's available everywhere. And then, but for print, it's Amazon.
Okay. So yeah, take yourself over to Amazon, and while you're listening, go get a copy of the book, read it. Yeah. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on it too. So, and reach out to Katherine. She's great.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks so much. I love that you enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed our conversation.